Take your eyes off the burning villages in Donbas, the bombed streets in Kyiv. Look south, where quiet but decisive movements are taking place along the Dnipro River. Right in this area, early in 2026, a pivotal shift in the entire campaign began to take shape. Russia still tries to maintain small attacks around the Antonivskyi Bridge, but achieves no confirmed advances. That not only signals the opponent's stagnation, but also exposes a bigger weakness. They are gradually losing the ability to control the tempo on the Kherson axis. But the more important story lies with Ukraine, where two tactical strikes are gradually reshaping the entire front. On the east bank of the Dnipro, Ukraine has turned the area into a dangerous zone where Russia cannot concentrate forces or maintain a safe rear. Recon UAVs, FPVs, and precise counter-battery fire have forced Moscow to spread troops thin and pull artillery out of range. And farther southeast, in Alexandrivsk and Zaporizhzhia, especially around Huliapole, Ukrainian units carry out localized counterattacks, breaking every Russian attempt to build pressure ahead of summer. Not a city falling, not a defensive line breached, but a system beginning to crack. These two offensives are undermining Russia's summer plans and shifting Ukraine's position at the international negotiating table. After Russia withdrew from Kherson in November 2022, the entire east bank of the Dnipro River became the first brick in the defensive system that Moscow hoped would hold the southern front firm. They dug dozens of kilometers of trenches, deployed artillery along the Ulysky-Novokakhovka area, set up rotating temporary ammo depots, and believed that controlling the east bank would allow them to maintain fire into Kherson without fear of deep rear strikes. Throughout 2023 and early 2024, the area remained relatively stable, not because Russia was strong, but because Ukraine at the time prioritized other directions like Bakhmut and Robotak. But since late 2025, the situation has clearly reversed. What was once considered Russia's safe zone has in just a few months become an area where the number of Ukrainian UAVs has multiplied many times according to open battlefield observations in Kherson. Russia still organizes small attacks around the Antonivskyi Bridge, yet there are no confirmed advances. Every movement is either stopped or repelled within hours. Russia attacks, Ukraine counters, and the map stays still. On the surface it looks like stalemate, but in reality, it is the sign of a gradual collapse in Russia's defensive structure. A system heavily dependent on a stable rear, now being strangled by the sky above their heads. In a few months, Ukraine has blanketed the area with layered Recon UAVs, high-flying ones monitoring supply vehicle movements, low-flying ones tailing every Russian group, and FPVs that need only seconds to strike after coordinates are sent. When a Russian group of 10-20 men begins assembling, UAVs detect it. When a Ural truck carrying ammo moves through sparse forest, Ukrainian artillery adjusts and fires immediately. And when an artillery battery prepares to fire, FPVs often arrive before they can get off a second round. This leads to specific failures that even Russia's Ministry of Defense cannot hide. Artillery positions must be pulled back 3 to 5 kilometers to reduce FPV risk. Range into Kherson drops significantly. Ammo depots are forced to be split up, making the supply line from Novokakhovka to Kozachyi longer and more chaotic, and infantry cannot concentrate enough density for a real river crossing. In contrast, Ukraine achieves what it needs without launching any grand amphibious assault. They hold the west bank but control the sky over the east bank. They do not attack deep, but every small Russian advance costs armor, ammo, or manpower. The deny zone Ukraine has built on the Dnipro is a textbook example of modern warfare. No need to recapture territory, just make the enemy unable to use their own territory. And as Ukraine shortens the ODA loop, observe, orient, decide, act, to minutes instead of hours, Russia's responses become chaotic, sluggish, and passive. The Dnipro has not seen a major assault, and Russia still holds the east bank on the map. But the nature of the campaign has changed. Russia has land but no longer the ability to use that land as a rear. Ukraine does not seize positions but seizes tempo, and once the rear is no longer safe, all of Russia's summer plans begin to wobble right from winter. If the east bank of the Dnipro River exposes the fragility in Russia's rear system, then at Alexandrovsk, the southwestern strip in Zaporizhzhia, extending down to Huliapole, Russia's campaign cracks appear even clearer. This was once the area Moscow hoped could create a breakthrough, open a northern bridgehead, and establish initiative before summer 2026. However, reality has gone the opposite way. Throughout 2024-2025, Russia's advance speed averaged only 15 to 70 meters per day across various directions, an astonishingly modest figure for an army still claiming to be pushing back Ukrainian lines. In 2024, Russia expanded by about 3,604 kilometers squared. In 2025, about 4.831 square kilometers. Though on the surface this looks like progress, when weighed against the casualties and equipment losses they paid, this territorial growth has almost no campaign value. They lost more than they gained, and as early 2026 arrives, that trend becomes clearer than ever. At Alexandrivsk and Huliapole, Russian assault groups operate at higher density, but produce almost no map changes. Russian infantry groups trying to approach Ukrainian defenses are often detected by UAVs from afar. When they get close enough to prepare a breach, Ukrainian artillery is ready to halt every attempt. In an environment where every bush and rural road falls under recon aircraft surveillance, Russia simply cannot hide attack intentions. That is why their assault waves often collapse in the first few minutes, as Ukraine uses FPVs to strike concentrating formations or counters battery fire on infantry and armor assembly points. Meanwhile, Ukrainians operate on entirely different logic. They do not seek big breakthroughs, they seek weaknesses in the enemy's advance rhythm. When Russia seizes a fighting trench or small tree line, Ukraine counterattacks. When Russia masses troops on a village edge to prepare an attack, Ukraine strikes first. When Russia brings armor to increase pressure, Ukrainian FPVs lock on. Ukrainian counterattacks are often just a few platoons, but precise enough to prevent the enemy from expanding the ground they just took. The more failed attacks, the less momentum Russia builds for a summer campaign. And without momentum, they cannot accumulate reserves. That is the most dangerous thing for an army pursuing attrition warfare. Russian infantry keeps fatiguing from constant combat rotation, while armor is destroyed faster than it can be replaced. Some units sent to Zaporizhzhia are worn down in just weeks. Russia's campaign structure, which should have strengthened over time, is weakening as 2026 begins. In contrast, Ukraine reaps small but weighty victories, holding tactical positions, disrupting Russia's force buildup, and most importantly, they control battlefield tempo. Each counterstrike, even without clearly shifting boundaries, alters the campaign equation. Russia wants to win by mass, but Ukraine forces them to fight by precision, an area where Moscow has no advantage. And right in Alexandrovsk Zaporizhzhia, amid open fields and tangled defenses, Russia's hoped for breakthrough is being chipped away piece by piece before any viable summer plan can form. And when looking from Alexandrovsk Zaporizhzhia across the entire theater, an even darker picture emerges. The casualty and equipment math that even Moscow cannot bend with propaganda. Since the start of the 2022 invasion, independent assessments by international analysts show Russia has suffered about 1.2 million casualties, a colossal figure far beyond short-term regeneration capacity. In 2025 alone, Russian casualties are estimated at around 415,000, a year in which they gained only a few thousand square kilometers, an exchange far too costly for far too little campaign result. What makes this attrition equation even harsher is the fatality rate. The proportion of Russian soldiers killed among total casualties is significantly higher than modern warfare norms. The reasons are not hard to see. Ukrainian Recon UAVs operate in clusters, constantly overhead. FPVs ambush from just hundreds of meters, and Russian evacuation lines are often detected the moment ambulances or rescue teams try to approach the wounded. In many cases, wounded Russian soldiers die on sight because UAVs continue to shadow and strike any evacuation attempt. When the modern warfare standard of 3 wounded to 1 killed is reversed, it is not just a number, it is a warning that Russia's medical and command systems are collapsing under combat pressure. Russian equipment has paid no less dearly. Russia has lost over 2,900 tanks and large numbers of infantry fighting vehicles since 2022, all visually confirmed. Russia is losing equipment faster than it can replace it, and more tellingly, the quality of tanks reaching the front is declining, as Cold War-era T-54s and T-62s are pulled from storage to fill gaps caused by losses. Those losses should have brought Russia a commensurate campaign breakthrough, but they have not. They lose men, vehicles, artillery. But the map barely moves. Experienced soldiers from Mariupol, Bakhmut, or Crimea are steadily attrited, while replacements are mostly low-quality mobilized troops sent to the line with minimal training. That is the greatest strategic failure. High losses but no results. In contrast, Ukraine, despite shortages in manpower and budget, turns that disparity into advantage. They use drones costing a few $100s to destroy multi-million-dollar equipment. They use real-time recon to strike small assembly points. Russia is forced to create due to dispersal. They employ FPVs like scalpels to cut apart attack waves before they fully form. Each FPV strike not only destroys one vehicle, but weakens an entire link in Russia's campaign structure. As summer approaches, Ukraine does not need numerical superiority. They gain superiority by exhausting the enemy before the campaign can even begin. And at Alexandrovsk Zaporizhzhia, the area once expected to become Russia's attack springboard, it is Ukraine that is redefining the tempo and scale of the war. And from that casualty and equipment picture, the strategic meaning of the two offensives at Dnipro and Alexandrovsk Zaporizhzhia becomes clear. Ukraine is not just inflicting damage on Russia, meter by meter in the trenches. They are striking directly at the foundation Moscow needs to launch a meaningful summer campaign. To launch a large-scale campaign, any army needs 3 things: sufficient force accumulation, a local breakthrough as an opening, and most importantly, a safe rear for continuous troop rotation and supply. But the two fronts in early 2026 have successively knocked down all 3 pillars. At Dnipro, Ukraine does not need to seize the east bank, they just need to make it unsafe. When Russian artillery must pull back, when ammo depots are dispersed, when infantry cannot concentrate due to UAVs overhead, the east bank is no longer a true rear. It is only a fragile temporary buffer, easily broken, where every Russian preparation risks detection and destruction in minutes. The summer campaign cannot start from such a shaky foundation. At Zaporizhia, the situation is no better. This was the direction Moscow hoped would build momentum, widen an attack corridor large enough to force Ukraine to disperse forces. Yet Russian attacks at Oleksandrovsk are repeatedly broken, never forming any momentum. Every assault peters out before maturing into a local breakthrough. Without an initial breakthrough, there is no campaign springboard. And without a campaign springboard, the idea of a summer offensive remains a political slogan rather than a feasible military plan. Thus, Russia's position heading into summer 2026 is extremely precarious. High casualties, especially in 2025, are hollowing out experienced troops. Extremely slow advance rates, many areas only tens of meters per day, show they pay dearly for tiny gains. And crucially, there is no tactical turning point large enough to claim Russia holds the initiative. In contrast, Ukraine achieves what every defending army craves. They control tempo, deciding when Russia may advance and when it is stopped. They force Russia to defend deeper, pull back assembly lines, and waste resources holding areas once considered stable. And above all, Ukraine weakens Russia's large-scale offensive capability in its infancy. Without massive counteroffensives, without retaking dozens of square kilometers, they simply prevent the enemy from accumulating enough force to organize a campaign. The offensives at Dnipro and Zaporizhia are therefore not symbolic victories. They are structural victories, cuts into Russia's offensive capacity. Summer has not arrived, but the foundation Moscow needs for a breakthrough has been eroded layer by layer. And in modern warfare, the side that loses tempo loses advantage, no matter how many tanks or soldiers it possesses. Once the foundation for a summer campaign has been eroded like this, the next question becomes obvious. On the negotiating table, who holds the momentum? To negotiate from strength, Russia needs three core elements: a large enough territorial breakthrough to prove they are winning, a stable front to reduce rotation pressure, and casualty levels low enough to sustain domestic morale and legitimacy. But battlefield reality runs the opposite way. Russia has no strategic advance for many consecutive months. Every effort on the east bank of the Dnipro River or in Oleksandrovsk is stopped or broken before forming a real breakthrough. Meanwhile, casualties keep rising, and economic costs escalate quarter by quarter. IMF reports show Russia's 2025 economic growth at only about 0.6%, a figure clearly reflecting the exhaustion of its wartime economy and the defense budget continuing to devour other sectors. No new territory, no convincing victory, no economic improvement. That is a position hard to bargain from. In contrast, what Ukraine needs to enter negotiations without being at a disadvantage is completely different and far more realistic. Hold defenses firm, make Russia pay dearly for every advance attempt, and most importantly, maintain steady Western support, especially from the US and EU. The two offensives at Dnipro and Zaporizhia fully meet all three requirements. Ukraine proves it can block Russian breakthroughs. It forces the enemy to expend forces and equipment far beyond gains. And by maintaining battlefield tempo, it convinces backers that aid still produces real impact. The negotiating position has thus seen a subtle but profound shift. Russia finds it increasingly hard to prove it is winning, while Ukraine can argue it has halted Moscow's advance on both key fronts and weakened Russia's near-future offensive capacity. In any negotiation based on military power, the side with better battlefield prospects has the louder voice at the table. And at present, the balance tilts toward Kyiv. From the US perspective, this carries undeniable strategic meaning. Aid to Ukraine is producing concrete, visible results. It significantly reduces the military power of a geopolitical adversary Washington must always counter, and all crucially, without any American troops directly fighting. Ukraine fights, the West provides technology and ammunition, and Russia pays in manpower, equipment, and national budget. That is why, when negotiations open in the future, the question is not who is weaker, but who is tiring faster. And through the two fronts at Dnipro and Zaporizhia, the answer has become clearer than ever. And when putting all these pieces together from the east bank of the Dnipro River to the open fields of Oleksandrovskyi, we can clearly see what truly just snapped, what just broke in Russia's war machine. It is not a defensive line, not a city, not an attack broken in hours, or a small village changing color on the map. What broke here is strategic confidence, the myth Russia has relied on for 2 years, the myth of the military machine's infinite endurance, of compensating manpower with numbers, of a safe rear behind wide rivers, and of an inevitable summer campaign bringing breakthrough. Those assumptions, once seen by the Kremlin as the foundation of its entire strategy, have begun cracking precisely where they thought was most stable. At Dnipro, Ukraine does not need to retake the east bank to win. They just need to break Russia's rear structure. Every Recon UAV sweep, every FPV dive, every artillery position forced to pull back kilometers is a cut into the belief that Russia can hold a dozens of kilometers line undisturbed. An unsafe rear is an inoperable campaign. And at Alexandrivsk Zaporizhzhia, what is broken is not territory, but campaign rhythm. Russia wants momentum, wants force accumulation, wants a breakthrough point to expand from, but their assault waves are repeatedly shattered by UAVs. Infantry groups advancing are immediately countered, mechanized assets locked by FPVs before deployment. When attack rhythm is continuously disrupted, the campaign cannot generate momentum, and without momentum, summer victory remains a slogan. Overall, Russia has not collapsed. That must be emphasized. But their war machine is under heavy pressure from precisely what they once saw as advantages. Large forces, deep defenses, wide rear, high casualties weaken infantry, equipment lost faster than replaced, rear no longer stable, attack tempo unsustainable. Meanwhile, Ukraine has proven a model of modern warfare many Western militaries still consider theoretical. Warfare of technology, speed, decentralization. Cheap drones defeat tanks. Real-time information defeats cumbersome command. Small-scale counterattacks defeat mass linear assaults. Ukraine does not try to outnumber Russia, but makes Russia's war equation meaningless. And that is why saying something snapped is not a single battlefield moment. It is a structural change. An army that thought it could attrit the enemy by mass, but is instead attrited by precision. A nation that believed it could rely on territorial depth for long war, but loses ground to an opponent that penetrates that depth with UAVs and flexible tactics. The Dnipro didn't snap because of one shell. It snapped because Russia can no longer secure its rear. And when the rear is lost, when advance momentum is cut, when casualties rise but territory stays the same, the battlefield begins tilting toward Ukraine, not through new map lines, but through the reality that Moscow is losing what it needs most to win: time, strength, and campaign confidence. Follow the next battlefield update to catch the latest developments, and don't forget to subscribe for the most important strategic analyses of this decisive phase. Thank you for following today's battlefield update to the end. If you found it useful, don't forget to hit subscribe so you don't miss the next analyses. See you in the next video, where we continue decoding the decisive movements of the war.